a foot soldier who has come from a life of poverty and crime in France, is shaking in terror. He had been on the road for months with the Crusader army. There were stories being told around the campfire of the Seljuk Turks, who with their swift, skillful swordsmanship and their ruthlessness give no quarter. They ruled the plains between Europe and the Holy Land. He heard the horses galloping closer and closer. He hones in on his rapid breathing. But the lone foot soldier knows the Crusader army have a trick up their sleeves. They have the very best warriors in the world, the one and only Knights Templar. But to be the best, you need to prove you are the best through conquest, sacrifice, and brutality. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you are new here, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and if you are already subscribed, welcome back. Today we'll be looking at the Knightly Order, whose history is shrouded in mystery, from conquest of the Holy Land to finding the Holy Grail, to what some historians claim to be the first multi-international cooperation. I am of course talking about the Knights Templar, who here on this channel we only focus on the facts. This is of course part number 2 of 5 parts of this series, so if you haven't watched part number 1 yet, go ahead, stop what you're doing, watch that video first. The link is in the description down below. Now, let's get into this. In part number 1, of course, we talked about how the order formed and how it expanded, not only becoming a military force to be reckoned with, but becoming an economic powerhouse. Across Europe, kings noticed the Templars and began to take advantage of their financial services because it was organized to guarantee checks, offer loans to militaries, provide credit to cover ransoms, and it was the first organization to do this type of thing. There weren't only kings interested in these services, but the Pope became interested in their financial ideals as well. By 1240, Pope Gregory IX got the order to help him out to pay his debts. Simply put, at this time, the order became an international bank, but they were still true to their main calling: help protect the roads from and to the Holy Land so people could go on pilgrim in peace. But they also began to use their banking skills for these pilgrims. Previously, if you were on a pilgrim, you needed to carry bags of gold and silver and coins because you needed to pay for things. You didn't have a credit card back then, obviously, which made you an easy target for thieves. Hence, the Knights Templar had developed this idea. If you were a traveler or a pilgrim, you would go to the Knights Templar in your home city or country and give them your gold or silver, which they would sign a letter for you in great detail of how much gold and silver you had given and seal it in wax. You would then go travel to Jerusalem or anywhere else where the Knights Templar were and go to the Knights Templar in that city, give the letter in, and they would then give you whatever back you had given to them in your home city. It's the ancient version of a bank transfer. Though they were influential bankers, they are perhaps best known for their highly skilled military order, equivalent to today's Navy SEALs or SAS. The Holy Land is big and it consists of a number of different cities, and the Knights Templar couldn't be everywhere. There was an ancient city which was part of the first civilization of Mesopotamia, the city of Edessa, not Odessa, and the Islams once lived in that city. They once inhabited it and they wanted it back. And in 1144, under the Atabeg, the Emir of Mosul, Aleppo and Hama, the one and only infamous man named Zengi marched his army to Edessa from modern-day Iraq. And after 2 months of siege, he captured the city on Christmas Day, 1144. He recalled the tales of the Crusaders butchering the inhabitants of Jerusalem some 45 years before, and he ordered his men to do the same. taking away 10,000 children to be sold into slavery, forcing the women to marry his soldiers, and the Archbishop of Edessa, Hugo, is hacked to death by an axe. This act couldn't go unnoticed by European kings, queens, the Pope, and Christians, who were all mortified by this, and it sparked the idea of a second crusade. By the 27th of April, 1147, Pope Eugenius III and the King of France, Louis VII, met in Paris. The Pope had decided he was going to declare a holy crusade, a holy war, and Louis VII said, "I would like to lead this war." The two rulers joined forces and mustered up a mighty army. At the time, the Knights Templar were led by Everard de Bois, who was impressed by the men's zeal and willingness to fight. So he joins his friend Louis VII, the King of France, and says his order will take up the call of Deus Vult, God wills it. The ranks of the combined forces of the Crusaders, which had mainly been mustered up by the Pope and Louis VII, grew to around 15,000, mainly Frenchmen. And the knights were only a small part of the army. Now we must think here, Paris to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, is a mighty long way. And most foot soldiers had never left their own village, never mind their own country or continent. The Knights Templar would ride on horseback, but not everyone was so lucky. They walked to Constantinople and then down to Damascus. The trek turned the Crusaders into a messy, disconnected group of nobodies. The King Louis VII, who was the Crusader leader, tried to literally whip his army into shape, even cutting off the hands and ears to make an example of ill-disciplined men. But he was unable to get them in order. After 6 months, half a year of marching, by January 1148, the group of Crusaders was attacked by local Seljuk Turks in modern-day Turkey. The army, with no discipline, was decimated. But there was one group of men who held their own, the Knights Templar. Here, Louis saw what they had done, and Louis VII made a very strange decision for a king at the time. He handed over his rulership and leadership of the Crusaders to the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Each and every general foot soldier would become temporarily a part of the Knights Templar. The very real Knights Templar were given a division of 50 soldiers each. The soldiers swore an oath never to leave the battlefield and follow the orders of the Knights Templar. The knights looked at their tired and inexperienced soldiers and realized they were indeed in bad shape and they needed training if they were going to have any chance in the Holy Land. So they took the techniques of the Seljuk warriors and taught the soldiers how to beat them. Because of their very light armor, they were exposed to the knights' heavily armor, especially in hand-to-hand combat. The next time the two armies met, the training had paid off, because the Seljuks would be the ones who fled in terror. When the Crusader armies arrived in Old Dilia by January 1148, the Crusaders were now better trained, they had higher morale, and they were indeed on the up for the first time. The King Louis VII, who was in charge of the financial backing of the operation, saw that he was coming into trouble because the locals had upped their food prices and good prices because they knew that the Crusaders were coming in the Holy Land. And by March 1148, the budget was completely spent. Louis VII needed money, and fast. So what he did is he turned to his friend, the Grand Master Everard de Bois, and asked him if he could please have a loan to the value of 30,000 French pounds, which is equivalent to around 10 million US dollars in today's money, which is around half of what the king's annual revenue was. An extraordinarily large sum for the day. Not even the Knights Templars had this money laying around, even though they had an international banking system. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Everard de Bois, was however loyal to the King of France and to the Crusader army, so he left them in Antioch on a fundraising mission to liquidate Templar funds, mortgaging large sums of land and properties across the Holy Land, and he nearly brought the entire Knights Templar to bankruptcy. But He pulled through with the money and saved the king from financial ruin, which meant that the crusade could go on. By June 1148, after a year of travelling, Louis VII and the Crusaders with the Templars met at a conference where they met the German Frederick I, who would become Holy Roman Emperor in time, and they also met the King of Jerusalem, Baldwin III. Both these men pledged their own troops to fight with the Crusaders, and they decided they should have a target. Their target is the historic city of Damascus. On the 24th of July 1148, the siege of Damascus begins. Now, the logistics were horrible. No one had the correct information. They didn't have good communication. Within a few days, they started to run out of food. Each faction didn't have the correct idea of what to do, so there was infighting. No one could decide what the fate of the city should be if they found victory, and after a few days, only 4 days, the 28th of July 1148, the army decides to give up altogether and go home. This is known as the fiasco of Damascus. After a year of misery and toil, traveling, being attacked by Seljuk Turks, finally getting their act together, growing their numbers, and deciding what their objective should be, the Second Crusade, who was framed around the Order of the Knights Templar, who had put in this massive amount of money for financial backing, had, in the end, achieved absolutely nothing. It was deemed a failure, and it was an embarrassment for the Knights Templar. Some of their companions would go as far to say that the Knights Templar had accepted a bribe from the Damascus Muslims so that they could organize everything badly and put up a weak fight. It is perhaps just slander, but after 50 years of Knights Templar military invisibility, this fruitless defeat is considered a little bit suspicious. This is one of the first accusations that in time would see the fall of the order. But first they need to go from strength to strength to strength to a quick and plummeting downfall. Find out what happens next in part number 3. I really do hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you want to watch in the future by commenting down below. Like, comment, subscribe. The more you know.